From APM, American Public Media.
The First Coast Relocation Guide, an annual publication dedicated to helping thousands of newcomers to Jacksonville make informed decisions. From realtors to restaurants, builders to boutiques, introduce your brand to potential customers. Info at heritagepublishinginc.com.
The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, Duval County public school officials brace for their first book ban debate, while the Florida legislature considers mandatory cursive and prohibitory cell phones. Then, from the wilds of Florida to the dark recesses of his mind, we talk to acclaimed Jacksonville artist Jim Draper about the inspiration for his new book of short stories. And warm spring weather meets cool jazz at this Friday's Jazz in the Garden event at St. John's Cathedral. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org or tag us on social. It's all ahead this hour after today's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Strong storms in the central and southeastern U.S. are blamed for at least 39 deaths over the weekend. People were killed in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Alabama. From Troy Public Radio, Emily Mosier reports on what people in southern Alabama experienced.
People in Troy, Alabama, who once considered themselves living in the woods, say that has changed after a tornado toppled hundreds of trees around their homes. Don Wambles with the Alabama Disaster Relief Association has rushed to many scenes of destruction to provide aid. But he breaks down when talking about the tornado in his own neighborhood.
You see the damage, the destruction to people's lives, and the fact that they're just absolutely overwhelmed by the damage.
Alabama Governor Kay Ivey has expressed condolences to those across the state who have experienced property damage and loss of life. For NPR News, I'm Emily Mosier in Troy, Alabama.
President Trump says he will speak with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, tomorrow. The Trump administration continues to pursue a ceasefire deal in Ukraine. Trump has said he's cautiously optimistic about a peace deal. NPR's Charles Maines reports that's despite a list of concerns that Putin raised about the ceasefire plan.
President Putin is on record saying he supports Trump's ceasefire proposal in principle, but the Kremlin leader also laid out a laundry list of issues that he insists require further discussions. That includes how to keep Ukraine from using the ceasefire to rearm, who would monitor the agreement, and what penalties might exist for violating its terms. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accuses Russia of stalling for time to improve its battlefield position. Meanwhile, Moscow continues to demand what a senior Russian Foreign Ministry official called ironclad security guarantees, excluding Ukraine from NATO membership, and ruled out NATO-aligned European peacekeepers monitoring any ceasefire if and when it comes. Charles Maines, NPR News.
A federal judge in Boston has set a hearing this morning to review the deportation of a doctor from Lebanon. NPR's Tovia Smith reports the judge says he has received serious allegations that the Trump administration disobeyed his court order not to deport the doctor who was legally working in the U.S.
Rasha Alloway, a kidney transplant doctor at a Brown University-affiliated medical group, was here on an H-1B visa. That's the one meant for highly specialized workers. And she went to visit family in Lebanon, and when she returned, she was detained for 36 hours at Boston's Logan Airport. Apparently, even her lawyers made a frantic call to the airport control tower trying to stop the plane she was on. But they say officials, quote, willfully disobeyed the judge's order and sent her back anyway.
NPR's Tovia Smith reporting. On Wall Street and pre-market trading, Dow futures are down by about 160 points. You're listening to NPR News.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's now 9:04. The future of World Golf Village near St. Augustine is once again up for discussion this week. The St. Johns County Commission will hear an update Tuesday about the property. One possibility for the area is for the operators of the St. Augustine Amphitheater to take over the IMAX Theater. Well, their goal is to turn it into a community theater and event space. The County Commission will also discuss potential changes to its building codes. Several county commissioners are hoping to pass stricter tree protection guidelines that would prevent developers from clear-cutting land and removing so many trees before building. The meeting kicks off at 9 in the morning tomorrow at the County Auditorium in St. Augustine. You can also watch the meeting live online at the county's website, which is sjcfl.us. The surge in scam road toll collection texts is prompting the state attorneys general to warn people who get them not to respond. The texts impersonating state road toll collection agencies attempt to trick phone users into revealing financial information like their credit or debit card numbers or bank accounts. The fraudulent demands are referred to as smishing scams, a form of phishing that relies on SMS texts to get people to send money or share sensitive information. After the cold start that we had today, it's going to be a beautiful afternoon. We're going to have highs in the mid-60s with breezy conditions. Tonight, clear skies with lows dropping down into the mid-40s by sunrise.
Support for NPR comes from the Skoll Foundation, dedicated to powering social innovators to transform the world. Learn more at skoll.org. And Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a book about child sexual abuse is the first to face a formal book challenge in Duval County schools. We discuss the future of the young adult novel Identical, as well as other school news making headlines. Later in the program, Jacksonville artist Jim Draper joins us as we discuss his first foray into literature and the inspiration behind his new book, Shantyboat Stories. But first, spring break has begun on the First Coast, and we wanted to take the opportunity to catch up on the fire hose of school-related news with education reporter Megan Mallicoat from Jacksonville Today. Good morning, Megan.
Good morning, Ann.
So I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that Duval County is just now facing its first book ban challenge.
Yes. And I think I should clarify that it's the first challenge since Florida's new laws a couple of years ago. That if you trace back the history of Duval Schools, of course, we've been around a long time and there may be more challenges. But this is, people may remember the uproar of news about Florida's changed media review laws a couple of years ago. And this is Duval's first challenge since then.
So during the period, after those laws took effect, there was all of these images of schools with empty bookshelves and such, including in Duval County. What was that? How is that different than what we're seeing here?
Right. And so I think Duval actually made some news nationwide with its pictures of empty bookshelves and so forth. The way that that's different is because those books were being reviewed by the district's media staff, by their librarians, and going through the district's process in that way. And then eventually they did come back, and I've been in plenty of media centers in Duval County, and there are books on the shelves again. But the way that this is different is because there's now been a formal complaint about this specific book, and then there's a separate committee that the school district has created to go through and review this, and then allow the school board to actually vote on the specific book rather than the broad process that the media review team does.
Okay. And so this is a book called Identical that is being challenged, and it has been reviewed by this committee already?
That's a great question, and I would have to look that one up. I'm not sure because they reviewed a lot of books already, so I'd have to
Okay.
specifically look that up.
Okay. So, what do we know about the nature of this book? Because it has come up at school board meetings that you've watched previously.
Yes, and in fact, that's what triggered the challenge, the review process for this specific book is that a group of community members started to read excerpts from this book at the November 2023 meeting, I believe. And one after another, they read some excerpts, and eventually they had their mic cut when, at the time, Board Chair Kelly Coker, had asked them, please stop, please stop, please stop, because the excerpts were not something that you would want to read in a room full of young children, sometimes attend school board members or school board meetings. And as Dr. Coker had said at the meeting, that the board has policies against vulgar language and things like that during the public meeting. And so they kind of hung it up on that, is that they didn't want that. But eventually, like I said, they cut their mic. They escorted at least one of the members from the building. The police escorted him away from the mic when he didn't stop. And the board attorney, Ray Poole, was also kind of getting into a back and forth with the people about how the board maintains the right to have decorum in the meetings. And so that triggered the review process, and it's been kind of a slow process as far as why it's taken a year and a half to get to this point. I'm not exactly sure, other than it's the first one, so perhaps it took longer to run through the first one. I'm not sure.
And I know that the fact that when parents who object to, for instance, this book, they're reading excerpts, they're being told this is, unacceptable to be reading at a public meeting. And they're sort of saying, well, doesn't that prove our point, right? You can't allow me to read an excerpt from this book. Why should my kids be allowed to read it?
Absolutely. And so proponents of removing this book from the library would say exactly that, is that if it's not acceptable, it's not appropriate to be read in the middle of a public school board meeting, then I don't want my child to have access to it in the school library where they might stumble upon it. But opponents of the push to ban or to remove the book from the library would say that it's not available to all ages in the library. It's currently, or at least it was, available to high schoolers, I believe. And they're not asking for it to be available in, say, elementary school libraries. And that there's a difference with the ages of children that it's available to, but a public meeting should be, say, G-rated.
Right. And this book is about a difficult subject of child sexual abuse.
It's a very difficult book. I don't think that anybody would say that it's just a fantastic, fun beach read. It's not that kind of a book at all. It is about child sexual abuse. The identical title comes from the main characters being twins. There's two girls, and one is being abused by her father, and the other kind of has these complicated feelings of wondering why she wasn't the one selected.
She's
for
sort
her
of
father's
starved for
favor.
affection.
Starved for affection, right?
Yeah.
But
that reveals itself in complicated ways. That
absolutely
is troubling to some people.
Yes, it's extremely troubling.
Yeah. And so this discussion, how do you anticipate it going down? I mean, we know that Clay County has had a lot of these book challenges, maybe hundreds, but this is really the first example of it in Duval. What do you anticipate?
Yeah, it's Duval's first book challenge. So the committee has already reviewed it. They reviewed it last month, I believe, or earlier this month. And the committee has recommended that the book be returned to high school libraries, and also that the access to the book be expanded by including it in guidance counselor offices.
So their recommendation is not that the book be removed.
Right.
And who composes the committee?
So the committee right now, that's a great question. The committee right now is a group of, it's like a representative from the district's library staff, a grade level expert, a teacher type, a subject matter expert, a student representative possibly is allowed to be on the committee, and a representative from the district SAC committee, the advisory council. So people like that. It's about 7 people make up the committee, and there's a requirement that that they have, I think, 3 of them at least able to vote on it. So, however, some people have pushed back on the makeup of the committee, and so I believe it was board member Tony Ricardo is pushing to change the way that the committee is constructed, and instead to have a model where each board member nominates a member.
Okay.
Which other committees in the district follow that model. So I think he's saying that this is an opportunity to use that model as well, instead of the current system.
And given the makeup of the school board itself, which has, I think, a predominant number of members who identify with a fairly conservative leaning group, the Moms for Liberty, that would obviously change, perhaps dramatically, the recommendation.
Right. I suspect that it would significantly change the makeup of the committee. And I'm not sure about every district in the state of Florida, but I know that at least our neighbors in St. John's use a similar makeup for the committee. As far as the current makeup of Duval's, it's similar. It's kind of appointed by skill and background and things like that, and not just appointed by every board member. So it would be a very different type of committee if this change were to happen.
The school board is not compelled to take the recommendation of the committee, I would imagine?
No, they're not. They can make up their own minds. And they've had discussions in the last couple of workshops that I've watched, or their meetings, getting ready because they knew that this is coming down the pipe, talking about how they can make up their own mind and being encouraged. Like, some of the board members are encouraging each other to make sure they've read the book themselves so they know what they're voting on and they're not simply voting on a committee recommendation. So I expect that there will be a lot of discussion about it, and it will be interesting to see which way it goes.
You anticipate a lot of public comment?
I would imagine so, because at the very beginning of this story, right, it inspired tons of public comment that night, and so I would expect that there will be more. There's been a lot of chatter on social media, and I know the board members have been hearing from their constituents about it as well. It's a hot topic in the community.
Sure, yeah. If you're just joining us, we're talking to Megan Mallicoat. She's an education reporter with Jacksonville Today. We're talking about some of the latest school headlines here in Duval and statewide. Right now, we're talking about a proposed book removal called Identical. Sorry, blanking for a minute. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. We've got a call from Susan in Mandarin. Good morning, Susan. Go ahead.
Yes, I would like to say I'm one of those people that strongly object to the school board appointing members to the committee. I was actually on one of the review committees. We reviewed Kite Runner, not because a parent challenged it, but because an AP teacher wanted to make sure that it was okay to include in her class. And so the way they pick community members and parents is at random. You apply, and they put you on a list, and so you get a wide variety of people from the community, and we don't need the school board to sway the committee one way or the other. I think that would be really wrong. And as you said, the school board can ignore the committee, but they shouldn't also be able to appoint people, in my opinion, of course. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan. We also have a message from Katie Hathaway from Public School Defenders on Facebook. She says, unlike those trying to ban the book Identical by Ellen Hopkins, I have read it in its entirety. The Book Review Committee unanimously voted to reinstate the book and expand access to high school guidance officers. The school board will vote on it on April 1st. So, obviously there's different perspectives out there. The book that Susan referenced, The Kite Runner, also has some very disturbing scenes of child sexual abuse. It is also very hard to read parts of it.
Yeah.
But has been one that's been allowed to remain on the bookshelves. I mean, I think that there are a lot of topics out there that kids experience in real life that are very hard to read about.
Yeah, and I think that's one of from what I've heard in favor of keeping the book, the perspective that I've heard is that there are children in the district who are suffering abuse in many different ways. And so if it's in the library, or especially they're saying if it were to be put in a guidance counselor's office where a guidance counselor can recommend the book, that it could help a student going through a very difficult situation. Of course, there's another side to that as well that we've heard from the people that read from it at the school board meeting.
All right. A message from Ed on Facebook. He says some books and materials should not be out all in our K-12 schools, while other books should be available based on age-appropriate grade levels. Common sense should be the rule.
Yes. Well, I think that's the way it currently does run, is that the media center, or the media centers across the district already have some books that are age appropriate for your elementary, some books that are age appropriate for high schools, and then that varies within. And a parent is already able to request that their child not be allowed to see certain materials.
Yeah. For people who want to get involved in this discussion, what would you ask them to do?
I think that you talking to their board member representative would be effective because the board will vote on it on April 1st, I believe, is the
Yeah.
first Tuesday in April. Um, and then coming to the meeting for public comment as well.
All right. I want to move on now to a topic that it was settled last week. It was a very difficult situation. A school senior named Kayleen Brown died in 2023 after eating a baklava that was being served at school. She had a nut allergy. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened there and what we know about the settlement?
It's such a sad situation. If you look at the court documents, it says that the student was at a club meeting after school, I believe, and they were serving this food that she had not had before. And she asked the adult in charge if it had nuts, and she was told that it didn't. And unfortunately, it definitely did. And so, as she ate it, she started to recognize that she was having an allergic reaction, and she notified the adult in charge, and they did not follow the district's own policy to help a student having an allergic reaction that way. And they didn't like call 911 or get some other type of help for her. And so the student actually left the school and went to like a drugstore, I believe, to try to find some Benadryl. And her allergic reaction got worse and worse, and ultimately she died, unfortunately. Um, so we know from the court documents that it was settled in mediation. We have not heard yet how much the settlement was for. When things like that are settled in mediation, the dollar number doesn't make its way to the court docket, but eventually it will come out probably through a public records request from the district.
Yeah, we know that the father in this case was asking for a minimum of $50,000, and so we know it was at least that much, but presumably significantly more.
Right.
Okay. Um, Lawmakers in Tallahassee are looking at a number of bills that are going to be impacting families here on the First Coast directly. One of them is interesting, this required cursive proposal.
Yes, cursive is such a hot topic because I think that when people our age and older find out that students don't learn cursive in school anymore, we get outraged because we can't imagine not knowing cursive, right? And so the lawmakers in the current legislative session have said they need to know cursive, and they would add it to the curriculum standards for second through fifth graders, that they would have to demonstrate proficiency in cursive. I think from what I've seen, just from observing my own children's curriculum, what they probably replace cursive with is typing nowadays. Um, like my young son right now, when he probably should be learning cursive, is learning typing at the moment.
Yeah.
So,
It's interesting that, I mean, there is some research, I guess, that shows that cursive is helpful developmentally, can also help you with comprehension.
yeah.
But it also is hard to shoehorn in just one more thing with all of the lessons that the kids are already required to learn.
Right. And this year, all fourth graders in the state of Florida take one of their standardized tests that they take at the end of the year is a writing test, where they have to write. I'm not exactly sure how long it is, but several paragraphs, like an essay type of writing assignment. And typically, the students would have written that down just handwriting because they're learning to write in fourth grade, and so they write it down and then they go and grade it that way. But this year, for the first time, it will be typed across the state of Florida, which has added an extra component of, not only as the fourth grade teachers, then not only are they needing to introduce them to the concepts of how to write a coherent essay, they're also having to teach them how to do it while typing, which is a different skill set, right? So I understand why they're focusing on typing, and also I understand why they would want them to know how to read cursive. As a journalist, I access public records all the time that are handwritten, so I can't imagine a child, 10, 20 years from now getting these records that are in cursive because they're older and then being like, what is this? I can't read it.
Yeah, not being able to read it. I mean, one thing I've noticed, even with my own kids, is they don't really have a signature anymore
Right.
because they don't know cursive. They just
Yes.
sort of print their name and then they print their name. But typing too, I mean, a lot of kids don't actually know how to type. They tend to use their thumbs on their phones and their index fingers on
Right.
their keyboards, but they're not proficient in typing in the way that we think of.
Right, right. So I think that, at least in my son's experience, part of the preparation for this state test is that they're teaching them how to type properly. But I don't know how universal that is across the state, or if it's just his teacher taking the initiative to do it. I'm not sure.
Is there any sense at the local level whether they are, favoring this legislators in Tallahassee dictating curriculum? I mean, has there been pushback on that, or are people fairly open to the idea of this?
That's one I
requirement.
have not heard our local board members talk about a whole lot. That they're much more focused on things like the school start times and some other bills that would change the way that a school board can buy property and things
Well,
like
let's
that.
talk about school start times since you mentioned it.
Sure.
That's something that had been mandated, trying to delay school start times. We've talked about that before, you and I on this program. Now that is being abandoned, that effort.
Well, as they did it kind of, the legislature, by they, I mean, passed the initial bill kind of quietly that people didn't, for whatever reason, didn't really see it in there. And so then when it got closer to the date where it was having to be implemented, because it's supposed to be implemented not this coming school year, but the following one, suddenly people saw it in there, and it caused some panic in different communities across the state. Duval among them, mostly from the perspective of administrators, because it can logistically complicate things like a great deal, because the busing mainly, the district has one set of buses that they use to do 3 or 4 routes, for elementary, middle, high school, and in our case, magnets. And so it's a lot to try to figure out how to change everything, even though there is a lot of research that says high schoolers benefit from getting up later.
This bill basically that was passed a couple of years ago had said no middle school start times before 8, no high school start times before 8:30. And as you say, there is a lot of science that is fairly undisputed about the benefits, and it ranges from, you know, cognitive development, better attendance, fewer car crashes, and reductions in substance use, suicidality, and depression. I mean, those are pretty powerful um, benefits to be gained by a later start time.
They are powerful, and I don't think I've not heard anybody say, "Boy, that's a bad idea." High schoolers should have to get up early. If they say that, it's mostly in the context of let them figure out how to wake up early, just like in the real world, kind of thing. But most people acknowledge that high schoolers certainly can have these physiological benefits from sleeping later. Um, but opponents of this original bill, proponents of the new bill, would argue that local school boards should have the choice of when their schools start, because each community has different needs and different complications. Some communities look to their high schoolers to provide care for their elementary schoolers, either before or after school. Some communities put more emphasis on sports and things like that, and that changes how they like their schedule. So the proponents of reversing this bill would ask that the local communities be allowed to determine when their schools start.
Is it fair to say, though, that this is really just kind of about an access to resources? Like, if there was more money for buses, this would be probably the choice of school districts and school leaders.
Oh, I would imagine so. I mean, in a perfect world, if you had a set of buses that could take all children where they needed to go all at the same time, you might have all of the schools starting at a reasonable hour. In fact, I think I heard Superintendent Bernier say that once, is that, in a perfect world, we would have all schools start at, 8:30 or whatever. Nobody would have to start super late and then go into the evening, and nobody would have to start super early and then be done at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But the state does not provide a lot of funding in terms of transportation, and the district is already having to make that up. And in the kind of budget climate that we're in, that's not how the buses work and do well.
Right. Um, Finally, I want to talk about a proposal having to do with cell phones in schools. This is one that tends to get parents concerned because it would involve basically taking a student's cell phone from them for the whole school day.
Hmm.
Some parents have safety concerns.
I think, yes, I think that makes parents nervous to think that they can't get in touch with their child during the day. Um, and of course, when you and I were in high school, it wouldn't have occurred to us to have a cell phone in our backpack. But it is how it works now, that students are used to having a way to communicate with their parents from school.
And
It,
certainly, school environments have changed a great deal too.
they certainly have, and so in emergency situations, I think that parents feel comforted by the idea of having a way to contact their child, and the children may, return that they may also like having a way to contact their parents. I think that the reason why they would take them is because of phones can also, of course, prove to be extremely distracting while trying to have a school day.
Yeah, and some teachers have taken it upon themselves to take at the beginning of class. Some even have little cubbies that kids put their phones in. But this would basically require school districts to do it, whether or not they wanted to, or individual teachers, whether or not they wanted to.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and so do you anticipate, is there any sense as to whether this bill is destined for success, or if it's, basically widely embraced by the legislators in Tallahassee?
Right. It will be an interesting one to watch. It will probably come down to the type of feedback they get from their local districts. Is that it's another one of those issues where I don't think anybody thinks that it's a great idea for kids to have phones while they're trying to to learn. However, there's complicating factors that make it where you can understand both sides of the issue.
Yeah. Well, a lot to watch. And thank you very much, Megan, for coming on to help us catch up with the latest headlines. Megan Mallicoat from Jacksonville Today. Really appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks, Ann.
All right. Up next, after years of storytelling through paint and photography, local artist Jim Draper explores the literary world. Welcome back. Well, Jacksonville artist Jim Draper joins me now. We're going to talk about his transition from the wilds of Florida to the dark recesses of his mind. He has written a new book of short stories called Shantyboat Stories, and he joins me now. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Ann.
It is nice to have you, and it is fascinating to see this new endeavor of yours because it is such a creative stretch after a career as a really, well-known and acclaimed painter here.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's something I always wanted to do. As a child, I read all the Southern writers. I got so interested in it, and it's been on my bucket list. And so I got to the point in my life I needed to start emptying the bucket. So
And so Shantyboat Stories is actually named for the writer's shantyboat that you began attending to share your work and to get feedback. Tell us, for people who aren't familiar with the shantyboat and its history, tell us a little bit about Lynn's writing workshop there.
well, the Shantyboat workshop was started by Lynn Skapiak Harlan. Lynn and her husband Jim moved to Shantyboat, plywood and tin boat on blue floats. They moved it from into the Seafarers Marina on the Trout River. And Lynn started doing writing workshops there several years ago. I got to a point when I turned 60, and I was like, again, I was trying to get the things done I always wanted to do. So I talked to Lynn. I'd known her for years. I talked to her about participating in the workshop. So I started it, and it was a wonderful thing. And you would crawl down this gangplank that was just like and it transported you. So we had writers sitting around the table writing all sorts of different types of work, and we worked on just craft technique, and that's what we learned, the craft technique. And the interesting thing about it is I found a lot of correlations between the craft technique of painting and the craft techniques of writing. There was the same kind of even the words, composition, some of the same words are a segue from painting into writing.
Explain that a little bit more.
Well, I talked to Lynn about the fact that through her teaching skills, I improved. I was teaching at the time at UNF, and I could improve my teaching skills. Art is art, whether it's the words. The words are symbols. The words are units of a composition. Paint, marks, all those things are units of a composition. So, if you understand that your job as an artist is to put those things together, those symbols together in a meaningful way, then that's what making art is. Music's the same way. The notes are components of a composition. So That's the way I approach writing, not necessarily from a I'm no grammatical genius by any way, and I can't spell anything, and, so it kind of, it allowed me the freedom of composing thoughts using words instead of paint.
The Shantyboat writing workshops were legendary for, I don't know if brutality is an overstatement, but people who experienced it, and Lynn herself would talk about it in interviews and podcasts about how it was a place where people really had to come prepared for very intense feedback.
Um, I think it was beyond intense. I think that she would strip you down to your bones and, in a good way, but it was done out of love. It wasn't done out of hate. It wasn't critical. It was a fair critique. It wasn't she wasn't being mean or critical. She was just being like, get rid of all that other mess in your mind and get to the cut to the chase and get your job done and learn the skills. It's that's one thing as a painter, as a realist painter. Also, I'm really taught learning the basic skills, and then once you learn the skills, you can go wherever you want to go. But learn the right way to do it. But yeah, Lynn was brutal. I mean, I saw people around the table cry, but it was always done like, here's a way that you can be better. I hear what you're saying, but you're not making any sense. Let's try it this way, or let's explore another avenue. So
Were there certain patterns to the things that you got feedback from her on to strip away? Like, were there kinds of things that you found yourself falling into as a writer that as a pattern she helped you correct, or was it more specific?
oh yeah, very much, because my first attempts at writing were very, very much the way I paint. They were about color. They were about the woods, the flowers, and all this kind of stuff. Um, she's like, people, that's enough's enough. Let's get some, get dialogue in there. She taught me that writer's adage about show don't tell. Actually show through dialogue, and that was the main thing that I learned from her. The best thing is like how you can create a story through the characters' dialogue, and I think you'll see that through the book.
The way that you realize your characters and that you set the scene, though, is very specific, kind of in the same way that your art is, in terms of it is incredibly detailed. It is, you can tell that the people that you're observing in your book, that you have watched them so closely that you're able to articulate the slightest movement to convey mood.
Yeah, and that's what I do. I'm a watcher. I participate. When I go in the woods, I do the same thing. I can sit and watch an anthill or watch a beetle travel through something, and I do the same thing with bugs that I do with people. I just watch and I listen, and I try to pick up the nuances, and I think the nuances in conversation and dialogue flesh out the characters. It's not the what they're saying, it's the how, as much as how they're saying it. So yeah, that's what I enjoy. I kind of I get tickled in the grocery store line just listening, or in the on the plane or whatever. I overhear. I'm nosy. It's fine.
It's fine. Well, it is a really closely observed and just really astonishing a feat. I want to talk to you about the way that you structured this book, because it is 23 stories. It has some nonfiction pieces. It has fiction pieces. Some of them are standalone. Some of them connect over the course of the entire book and tell you a character's story over a period of many years. How did you first of all decide that you wanted to do mix of fiction and nonfiction?
Well, I think it's almost I don't know if it was the cart before the horse, or I got the cart first and then the horse, or the horse first and then the cart. I don't know. Some of those stories have been rattling around in my head for decades, and some of them were uh, the Everglades stories were both, they were pretty immediate, and I don't know exactly. Uh, Last year, as Lynn and I were putting these together, we started finding these correlations. I think that from the stories, it would be the same thing in painting in that, you have these similar themes that go through your life, whether they be imaginary or real. There's still things that are on your mind, and there's several kind of nuanced themes that just kind of drift all the way through. But I don't know where a lot of it came from. I do know that it's always been part of me and part of my thought process. So, and I think the way I put them together was just the way I think, and it's disparate, a lot of disparate thoughts, but they all match.
I don't think I've read a book. I mean, you could tell me if you have, where there is this kind of a narrative through short stories that continues amid all of these other stories that, while they may have kind of a thematic connection, aren't really necessarily related to the longer series of short stories.
Right. I don't know that I've ever read anything like it. It wasn't intentional for me to change the world, but maybe it will.
These stories, some of them are very funny. Some of them are very funny and also really very dark. And you have, an exposure your whole life. You're a Southerner. You kind of have a little bit of a Southern Gothic sensibility, I would say, in your writing.
Yeah, well, I grew up in the dead center of Mississippi during a pretty horrific time. I was born in 1953, so I went through the end of Jim Crow, the beginning of civil rights, in I mean, the one of the stories references the helicopters when they were looking for the civil rights workers that were killed in Philadelphia. I remember the helicopters going in a grid over me, looking for the young men that were killed in the during Freedom Summer. I remember the Freedom Summer, the busloads of college kids coming down from the north, and all of us little kids were invisible then, so we followed all of back then we called them COFO workers, because that was the slang for Central Mississippi, because they worked with the colored folk, and so we followed them around. I was so fascinated because they looked like Peter, Paul, and Mary, and they looked like people we saw on TV, and I just wanted to be with them. I wanted to go home with them and not be where I was. So, but reading was a way to escape. As like a junior high school age, I was, you're living in the middle of a culture that you intuitively know you're not necessarily a part of. And I would walk across the town to the library on Saturday morning and check out just whatever I could get my hands on, mostly Southern writers. And I remember the librarian, who was a wonderfully ample lady, and she had half glasses, and she looked over at me as I was checking out Tennessee Williams, who I read all of his plays by the time I was probably 12. She said, "Does your mama know you're reading this?" And I said, "No, ma'am." And she said, "Well, we don't have to tell her, do we?" But that was the way I learned. That's the way I learned that there was another world out there, and that this situation that I was in was temporary, and that it was another world. So
You actually quote Tennessee Williams to start off your book. The quote begins, "The world is violent and mercurial. It will have its way with you. We are saved only by love." What is it about Tennessee Williams in particular that appealed to you, his work and his words?
I think that the thing that Tennessee Williams and probably most of the Southern writers of the time, is that they could look at these situations that we were in, and those situations from Tennessee Williams, from Eudora Welty, from Carson McCullers, William Faulkner, we saw those situations on a daily basis. And even the cadence of the language we were familiar with, because we would sit in living rooms, in dusty living rooms with odd smells and weird old people talking about stories that were the same. I mean, they were the exact same stories. And so it made it, I think seeing them in print made it real, and it made it so that there was a special, kind of a macabre special quality of our life then and there. And it made me realize that the fact that other people in the world thought it was special it just made it somehow more special for me.
You talk about the helicopters, and that is in one of the stories that you write about, which is the story of a maid. She also appears throughout the book. Her name is Pi, but this is our first meeting of her where she's working in a home for a white woman who is suffocating her in kind of every way. But she gets her revenge in this particular story in a very dramatic way. Um, Tell us a little bit about the inspiration for the character of
Well, I Pi.
think
think that growing up in then and there in the South, when a child is born, you're taken home and you're handed to a black woman, and there's a relationship between Southern children, and especially I think Southern males, probably with black females. That I mean, they're your caretakers. They feed you. They cook every meal. They do all your clothes. I mean, I was privileged. I mean, I have to admit, and it's a weird place to be from. It's like that not just the geographical place, but the point of privilege, in that I never made up a bed. I never picked up a article of clothing off the floor. I never really did much of anything because we had people waiting on us hand and foot. More or less, and it was kind of. I mean, I guess I probably might have done more than I thought, but for the most part, these women and you would sit in the kitchen while the maid cooked lunch. We had a big dinner every day at 11 o'clock, and so you would sit there and you'd talk and you learn and you learned about things that weren't necessarily part of your culture, and there was some things unspoken, some things unsaid, some things that you knew were there, and um, yeah, I've been challenged on that, writing from Pi's point of view about, how dare I understand what it's like to be a black maid in the rural South in the '60s, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, how dare all of us who try to empathize, try to crawl into a character's mind. I mean, we do it. Is it right or wrong? I don't know. I did it. I I love the character. I love her because of so many very strong um, women who were part of my just part of the way I grew up, what I grew up hearing and seeing and being, and they were uh, and there was a component of love. There was a very strong component of love and a very complex situation.
Yeah. And she is the maid in a family where the young man, Henry, he's one of these recurring characters as well. And they have stories unto themselves, they have stories together, but he's a pretty flawed character.
Yeah, he is flawed, and Henry has an unfortunate situation with peer pressure, which peer pressure is another thing that I think we're seeing a lot of in today's society. I wanted to kind of address you'll see some themes in there that are addressed because I just thought they need to be addressed in our current situational crisis that we're in. Yeah, but Henry goes along with the crowd and performs a horrific act that he pays for the rest of his life, and he can never be whole again. And Pi warns him that it's going to be with him, that this act is going to be with him for the rest of his life. And then, not a spoiler alert, but in the end, I think there's a certain resolution to that conflict, and both of them, in the end, seem to find some kind of resolution.
Yeah. And it is a fascinating journey that they each take. Um, this book has just been published. It is going to have a reception and kind of a
Yes,
launch
yes.
coming up on Wednesday of this week. Can you tell us a little bit
Yeah,
about
Wednesday
what that
night.
involves?
It's at the. Another fascinating thing is to see what's happening at the Phoenix on North Liberty, 2330, I think, North Liberty.
2320, I think, North
2320
Liberty.
North Liberty.
Yeah.
And this development is just fascinating. It's just absolutely, if you don't know about it, it's something to learn about.
Yeah, the
Tony,
Phoenix Arts
the
District
Phoenix
is.
Arts District,
Mhm.
Tony Cho from Miami has done and Emily Moody is a dear friend and has just done a tremendous job spearheading this. Um, it's Wednesday evening, 6 to 9. I'm going to do a short talk at 7. Not a long. I've been back and forth on whether to do a reading. I think I'm going to do excerpts,
Okay.
short excerpts, and not a full reading. But Lynn's going to talk a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit, at 7, and then but the rest of the evening will be festive. It'll be a celebration more than a lecture, so it'll be fun. So it's open to the public. Please come, enjoy. 6 to 9 Wednesday at the Phoenix at the Emerald Station.
Yeah, 2320 North Liberty Street. And a lot to celebrate. I mean, it really is a extraordinary shift and new territory for you. And I sure hope everybody gets a chance to
Yeah,
enjoy
thank
it.
you. I'm a little I'm a little all nervous about it, but it's what it is. You keep going. Artists, uh, people ask when you're going to retire. I said I'm on the shovel plan. Artists, you work, and then one day they dig a hole, and that's it. I'm just kind of I'll quit when I die.
Well, thanks for all the work that you've given us.
Thank you.
All right, Jim Draper, appreciate it.
Thank you, Ann.
Up next, warm spring weather meets cool jazz at this Friday's Jazz in the Garden event.
The Jacksonville Symphony presents Take 6 on March 29th. A cappella jazz, R&B, and gospel vocals blend with the full power of the Jacksonville Symphony live in Jacoby Symphony Hall. Tickets available at jaxsymphony.org. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. One text or call can wreck it all. Learn more through distracted driving presentations for teens and the workforce. Arrive alive. Let's end distracted driving.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
On the next Fresh Air, writer Clay Risen describes a political movement which destroyed the careers of thousands of teachers, civil servants, and artists whose beliefs or associations were deemed un-American. His book, Red Scare, is about post-World War II America, but he says there's a through line connecting that era to our current political moment. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
The Trump White House is using Department of Homeland Security intelligence to identify pro-Palestinian college protesters. Trump officials are demanding colleges help identify students and threaten to punish colleges if they do not comply. Courts have ruled that campus protests are protected by the First Amendment, but as the Trump administration seeks to punish speech it does not like, whose First Amendment rights are next? That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
The Trump administration is ratcheting up its attacks on the press.
I think it's insulting that you're trying to test my knowledge of economics. I now regret giving a question to the Associated Press.
It's changing who now has access to the Oval Office, including a ban on the Associated Press after it decided not to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Next time on 1A, we look at what these moves mean for press freedom, for free speech, and for you.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, it looks to be a beautiful week of weather, and those craving a little jazz al fresco, the garden at St. John's Cathedral has got you covered. Here to discuss the upcoming outdoor concert series is Dr. Mark Dickman, professor and founding member of the Jazz Studies program at the University of North Florida. Welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
Very well. Glad to have you here. So the North Florida Jazz Quartet is really one of the premier professional jazz combos that are in this area, in this region, in the state. How did it come together?
Well, part of it's my activities as an educator and a musician, and being invited by the cathedral to form a group and play. And again, we played other places, but the series at the cathedral is one of our main ones.
So that invitation kind of helped solidify the quartet and the direction that it took.
Yes.
Yeah. So you have been at UNF, as we said, you helped found the Jazz Studies program there. You've been there almost 40 years. But the music that you play is both traditional and influenced by a lot of, other cultures. Tell us a little bit about the style that you pursue.
Well, it's pretty eclectic under the umbrella of jazz. There's a lot of various influences. In fact, Duke Ellington mentioned something called the Spanish tinge back in the 30s, so that's in there. And so we do a variety of what we call straight ahead swing, and then we'll have a tune we'll have a bossa nova and a samba and like a rock type feel. So it's pretty eclectic.
And you play a number of instruments yourself, including the euphonium?
Yeah, euphonium, also known as sometimes baritone horn or tenor tuba.
Uh-huh.
And then I also play the regular slide trombone, and I have a valve trombone, too, I bring along with me. And that actually gets more questions. Less people have seen a valve trombone than anything, so they're always curious about it.
That looks different than a regular one?
Yeah, it looks odd.
Yeah. And so what is the quartet made up of from an instrument standpoint?
It's the group that's playing on Friday is going to be piano with Evan Anderson, a bass, Ricky Ravello, and Jack Miller on drums.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all associated UNF graduates
and
from the Jazz Studies program.
Oh, is that right?
And the people that are backing up, that'll rotate occasionally. So it's I rotate in and out. Sometimes I have guitar instead of piano, for example.
And this setting, as we said, the Jazz in the Garden environment is really just this kind of beautiful open air space for people to perform in. This is a great week for it, but it's also kind of like a after work opportunity to relax. There's wine. There's
food, gourmet food. I'm just knocked out at what they have there, and but the courtyard itself kind of runs east-west, and we play kind of in one corner, and then they have a big food set up on the other side, and it's really quite nice, and the crowds have been very healthy.
Very receptive, yeah. So can you give us a little sneak peek of what your set list might look like? What are people going to be hearing this week?
Gosh, I was hoping you wouldn't put me on the spot like that. But part of it is going to be called songs out of the Great American Songbook, like maybe There'll Never Be Another You, Take the A Train, and it also gives me the opportunity and the reason to learn some new tunes.
Okay.
And one that I'm going to add is one called Samba de Orfeo. And it just happens that one of my colleagues at UNF showed the movie Black Orpheus just this last Wednesday. And I said, that's odd because I just started learning it's a theme song from that movie. So it's pretty nice.
The jazz program is very, acclaimed at UNF. Recently lost one of its kind of foundational folk there, Bunky Green, who had been, a big part of that program.
Yeah, he was a dear friend and colleague, and just special. They, talked about how he always had that twinkle in his eye, and the jazz is serious, music's serious, but we can't take it too seriously. And again, he was very funny to be around, and we would get him to laugh, and he'd get us to laugh, and he was just a great person.
Yeah, I know he'll be missed, I'm sure, especially by you. Well, the event is Jazz in the Garden. It's Friday, March 21st. And so this goes basically from like 5:30 to 7. Is it music the entire time?
Yeah, we'll take a short break in the middle, little short break, but yeah, the music's there the whole time.
256 East Church Street, and I think a $10 suggested donation. Dr. Mark Dickman, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me. Have a good week.
All right. And that's our program. Thank you for listening. If you have comments or questions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight, or you can find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform. Join us tomorrow when we talk about the emerging science of cosmetic hazards, revealing dangerous levels of lead and cancer-causing materials that have been found in hair products marketed to Black women. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. World Affairs Council and UNF, partnering to engage citizens in becoming better informed participants in the global community. On March 25th, Heather Cox Richardson and Bill Crystal will address the future of democracy. More at worldaffairscounciljacks.org.
This is WJCT